territory through the night. Thousands of Gazans are said to be sheltering in UN schools. Others head to a border crossing with Egypt. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the strikes are just the beginning and that Israel's response to the Hamas attack will echo with its enemies for a generation. Plus, the leaders of Germany and France have expressed their steadfast support for Israel. It comes as they take part in an unusual meeting to boost ties between Paris and Berlin. I'm Ben Fazoulan. Welcome. The Israeli military says it has more or less restored control over its border with Gaza. But it says infiltrations by Hamas militants could still be possible. It says the bodies of 1,500 Hamas militants have been found in Israeli territory since they staged their unprecedented attack on Saturday. Israel stepped up its retaliatory airstrikes on Gaza overnight. A spokesman for the Israeli military advised any Gazan who could to flee. Hamas said that if Israel hit any residential building without warning, then it would start executing Israeli hostages and broadcast it live on TV. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first, a roundup of events so far.
Israeli tanks gather in fields outside Gaza. 2 days after the violent incursion and terrorist attacks by militant group Hamas, hundreds of thousands of Israeli army reservists have reported for duty.
We are imposing a complete siege on Gaza. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything will be closed. We are fighting against human animals, and we are acting accordingly.
Hospitals in Gaza are already feeling the effects of the blockade and are running out of critical supplies to treat the many injured by the ongoing strikes.
Unfortunately, the amount of medical supplies we need to deal with these injuries is insufficient. There just isn't enough, and some of the medicines are not available in the stores of the Ministry of Health. There's also the threat of running out of fuel and a power outage. Medical operations cannot be performed in emergency departments without fuel or electricity.
Israel says it is targeting facilities and headquarters of the Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorist groups, but hundreds of civilians are being hit by the missile offensive across Gaza. Israel says the borders with Gaza will stay tightly closed, reinforced by tanks, while soldiers scour southern Israel for Hamas fighters. But the rocket fire continues into Israel, and so does the aerial bombardment of the Gaza Strip. Israel's prime minister says that this is just the beginning.
I know that we all want immediate results. It will take time, but I promise you, dear Israeli citizens, at the end of this campaign, all of our enemies will know that it was a grave mistake to attack Israel. What we will do to our enemies in the coming days will reverberate with them for generations.
Fearing further infiltration by militants, Israel is also deploying troops and tanks along its northern border with Lebanon, shelling the area as they try to push back the threat, with Hezbollah responding in kind. Israel now faces the very real prospect of a multi-front war.
Our correspondent Rebecca Ritters is in southern Israel, close to the border with the Gaza Strip, where she's been reporting on a build-up of military hardware there in anticipation of a ground offensive from Israel on the Gaza Strip. Rebecca, bring us up to date. What are you seeing?
Yeah, well, we just had to move from that area where I spoke to you from before, where we were being able to show you those pictures of the military build-up. The military came and actually evacuated. That's perhaps a little bit too strong a word, but they asked us to leave that area. So we've come here. Behind me, you may not be able to see it, but that is Gaza, basically. on the horizon, and usually from this position you can see a lot of plumes of smoke from the pretty consistent airstrikes that have been happening throughout the day and night. At the moment, we haven't heard any for a little while, but that doesn't mean they're not happening elsewhere in the Strip. Now, as we were coming to air, there were some more rockets launched from Gaza. That's the first that I've seen in this area this morning. But there are still rockets being launched from that area. We've had no reports of any casualties in Israel or any injuries or any landfall of rockets this morning.
How are people coping with the escalation in the area? I mean, there's a blockade, there are ongoing attacks from both sides, I believe, and there's also this anticipation, this build-up of anticipation of a possible ground offensive.
Well, the blockade is happening on the other side of where I'm standing, and I can't speak to it, but I have been in touch with our colleagues on the other side and other contacts. They tell me that things are getting more and more dire because of the blockade. Gaza has been under a blockade of a different sort for many years, and they already have low stocks on many things. We hear that medical supplies will start running out, and of course perhaps food soon too. Things are really short, even water, and obviously there is very limited, if any, electricity going into Gaza at the moment as well. So things for civilians, not only who are the dire situation with the airstrikes, but are also having to face food shortages, water shortages, electricity shortages. They're not able to charge. Soon I'm assuming that people will run out of battery power and not be able to charge things, so not be able to keep informed. It's a really dire situation for people there. Now, for people on this side, it's also a very tense situation. It's like a ghost town, not just here in the south where I am, but by all reports across the country. I haven't been to any supermarkets myself. We have been too busy, but I'm told that the stocks on the shelves are running out as people kind of panic buy as they worry about what might be coming ahead. People on this side who are used to seeing rockets come over the border, who are normally pretty relaxed about it, if I'm to be honest. I've been down here before and reported when there have been other smaller conflicts, and you talk to residents and they say, well, that's life. But it's not quite the same feeling at the moment. People really preparing for something a lot bigger. And that's what we're hearing from the military, that we can be expecting something that will be what they're calling a paradigm shift.
Of course, this conflict is already huge. We've been reporting on the numbers. You've been talking about the build-up there. We've heard about the historic number of reservists being called up. Give us more idea of what we could expect from a ground operation, having been there where that military hardware is being set up.
It's hard for me to say. Obviously, the military are not giving any information about their next steps. We're hearing very strong language, both from the Prime Minister and also from then down to the military, who then speak to us and brief us on what's happening. But they're not giving us any exact information, as you can imagine. But they do say things like, use your imagination. I mean, it's language like this that you think, who knows what could be happening. We're showing you before. I don't know if you've got any of those pictures to show, but the kind of troop build-up, the hardware build-up that we're seeing along the border, and I'm told that it's happening all along the Gaza border. We're in the northern part that leads up to northern cities like Ashdod, Ashkelon, the very top of the Gaza Strip. But of course, this will be happening all along the length of the Strip, and it's certainly. It certainly looks and feels like whatever the next move is, it is going to be very big.
Rebecca Ritter's reporting for us from southern Israel. Thank you very much. And still to come, the leaders of Germany and France, Chancellor Olaf Scholz and President Emmanuel Macron have been meeting for a second day. A news conference is expected to start shortly. Their scheduled talks are about improving German-French relations, which have been off track for months due to policy differences. But the Israeli-Hamas conflict is likely to have dominated their meeting, of course. Both leaders have already expressed firm solidarity with Israel in a joint statement with the US UK and Italy. DW's Michaela Kufner is in Hamburg. Michaela, how is the Gaza crisis affecting the joint meeting?
Well, as you mentioned, we did see that joint statement there last night. There was that phone call that included the US president. So for once, he called Europe and spoke to both the German chancellor and the French president, also the Italian Prime Minister, of course, and the British one. And that statement reiterates the unwavering support from all of these countries, also from Europe. We saw Olaf Scholz at a statement on the first day reiterate that it is Germany's reason of state, quoting Angela Merkel from 2008, to secure the security of Israel. We do know that the United States is already sending military hardware ammunition. The Europeans have, as far as we know, not been requested to send anything like that, but Europe is standing ready and is being very firm also towards those countries hostile towards Israel, as it says in the statement, not to exploit this particular situation, but notably Iran was not explicitly mentioned in that.
Michaela, what kind of support are the leaders pledging to Israel, besides what you've already mentioned, as far as the differences go in what they're pledging?
Well, we haven't heard any hardware pledges yet. I think this will depend largely on the Israelis, what their expectation is. But what we already have here in Germany, but also across Europe, is a vibrant debate over how much assistance Palestinians should still be receiving in terms of humanitarian assistance. Germany has halted its payments. It's reviewing its future policies. The EU initially said it would do the same and halt payments, but now there is an internal debate going on, which is also showing a rift within the European Union on what approach to take towards stability in the region. And this is something that will also be discussed in Brussels as the foreign ministers of the European Union are meeting there today. So we expect more assurances, more guarantees of security, and a lot will depend on what Israel actually requests from European countries.
OK, and tell us more about the troubles that have been facing German-French relations of late.
Well, to put it briefly, the chemistry between Germany and France, particularly between German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and the French President Emmanuel Macron, simply hasn't been there so far. And that's also why, for the very first time, these joint consultations of the joint cabinets actually became a bit of a political retreat, with both sides staying overnight here in this Hamburg hotel. Behind me, they also went on various boats in various groupings to discuss a lot of issues. One key issue is both sides suspecting each other of paying or giving too many subsidies to their own industry in terms of energy prices. Particularly France is allowing for an industrial discount there. There's a debate here in Germany whether Germany would do something similar. And there are also two very different approaches to gaining more sovereignty, both in security terms, but also in making the EU a more politically independent entity in the future. There, Germany, particularly on defense, has initiated something called the Sky Shield, and France didn't sign up to that because France doesn't want to see the Europeans relying on hardware in terms of military hardware from the Americans and the Israelis. So Germany has just signed an agreement. France insists it wants to develop its own capabilities together with European partners. There's also talk of developing their own tank with the Germans. The Germans are a bit slow from the perspective of France. So there's a lot of nitty-gritty details, but they all feed back to both seeing the same challenges, but often having diametrically opposed approaches on how to tackle them. And the reason the EU keeps referring back to the Franco-German engine is because these countries are very important, but also because of their difference. If these two, Paris and Berlin, can find common ground, that has in the past pretty much always been a guarantor that the EU as a whole, all 27 member states, can find compromise.
The analysis there from DW's Michaela Köfner. Thank you very much. And let's get back to the situation on the ground in the Middle East. Journalist Hashem Balusha is in Gaza. I asked him about the conditions for people there considering the bombings and intensified blockade.
Well, it's continuous aerial bombardment, as you mentioned, hundreds or thousands of airstrikes all the time, different areas in Gaza Strip. There is no stop. I can hear from distance that some artillery shells as well at the eastern border or maybe in the northern area. Some areas were completely destroyed, and especially overnight in the city center of Gaza City, a neighborhood called Rimal. I talked to people who are from there, and they are inspecting their places, and they said tens of buildings were destroyed completely overnight. Gaza is in a situation that is never experienced before. People don't know what's next or what to do or how to cope with this.
Well, what can they do with the food, water, power, fuel supplies cut off? Where can they go?
Well, this is a question that nobody has an answer, at least the ordinary people. Still, if you can hear from the background, there is a strike somewhere, not far from where I'm staying. People don't know if they are waiting for the electricity, which is barely coming to their places, a couple of hours every 24 hours. Some places that they have no electricity for days. Internet connection is disconnected. Food supply is very limited. Access to many places is very hard. Excuse me. And things are very complicated. People don't have answer. They are questioning and wondering all the time what to do, where to go, how to survive with this. Nobody has answered.
Journalist Hashem Balusha reporting from Gaza. Major Libby Weiss, a spokesperson for the Israeli military, told us the situation near the Gazan border in southern Israel is challenging.
The situation is a very dynamic one, of course, in the last 4 days. The IDF is operating at this stage really to secure the border, to make sure that Hamas terrorists, first of all, are not continuing to operate within Israeli territory and in the civilian communities not far from the border. And of course, to prevent any other attacks that we have seen continuing since the horrific massacre of this past weekend. So it's a very dynamic situation and very much an active combat zone.
The militant group Hamas has threatened to kill hostages if Israeli airstrikes continue in Gaza without warning. Is it true that you were bombing Gaza without giving notice?
What I can say is this. First and foremost, the single most effective way of securing the safety of those hostages is for Hamas to release them immediately, with no conditions, with no discussions, or anything along those lines. The IDF has been striking Hamas sites within the Gaza Strip, of course, to prevent them from continuing the war that they started over the weekend. But the safety and the well-being of these hostages is under Hamas control. They could decide now to release them, to let them cross back into Israel, and that sits with Hamas as the number one thing they can do to ensure their safety.
But at the moment, they're threatening to kill these hostages if these bombings continue without notice. In the past, you alerted citizens before striking. Is it not the case anymore?
Again, the IDF is striking Hamas targets within the Gaza Strip. It is a very complicated operational reality right now. It is an ongoing battle, obviously within Israeli territory, as well. But again, the safety of these hostages sits with Hamas deciding right now to release them, to let them come back home. And that sits, again, that is within Hamas's power to do it immediately.
OK, I understand you can't answer the question fully, but what about the safety of Gazans who are trying to leave the Strip at the moment? I mentioned before the Rafah crossing. Israeli military sources have said that is being closed. There are reports, though, that it is open and people are getting through. There are safety concerns, though. The conditions of the road are also questionable. Can you clarify the situation for us?
Again, it is a very, very challenging situation. And I have to reinforce the idea that we are in a different paradigm right now. In previous exchanges with Gaza, the reality was a very, very different one. We are targeting Hamas. We are doing everything within our power to make sure that they can no longer keep striking in Israeli territory. Hamas, of course, is the target. There is no other target to what we are doing. But it's a far more complex reality, of course, than what we have seen in the past.
Let's talk then about these hostages. How many people remain captured by Hamas, according to your sources?
What we can confirm are dozens of civilians. We have, of course, a whole variety of men, women, elderly, children, absolutely horrific images that I'm sure everybody at this stage has seen of innocent people dragged from their homes, desecration of human bodies, of human life that we have seen, young people who were at a music festival who were dragged in. So the situation is a national tragedy. It's hard for me to even explain in words the sense of devastation, mourning that everybody feels over seeing innocent life just taken like this into the Gaza Strip. It's horrific, and it leaves us all truly in an ongoing nightmare here in Israel.
Well, Major, if you're unaware of just how many hostages are, how do you plan to bring them back safely?
Again, we are aware of the amount that I can confirm to you at this stage is we're talking here about dozens. Of course, the information that I want to give you is the most accurate and the most vetted. And, there is complexity here in making sure that we are in touch with families and for them to know about the status of their loved ones. So that is the specific information that I can provide to you as of now. And of course, we are doing everything within our power to get as much information about it and to be in open communication with the loved ones who are so concerned about their family members.
Can I just ask you one more question? As far as the Hamas militants who took part in the attack on Saturday, can you tell us how many were killed? We're being told some 1,600, and how many are in Israeli custody? It sounds like a much bigger attack than was being reported yesterday.
Again, it's a very dynamic situation because the battle is really ongoing. But yes, those numbers were released that we were talking about more than 1,000 Hamas terrorists who we killed in Israeli territory as they were attacking Israelis. And again, the situation is a dynamic one, so those numbers are subject to change as this battle continues.
Major Libby Weiss from the Israeli military, thank you for joining us here on DW News.
Thank you.
A quick look now at some of the other developments. The death toll since Hamas launched its attack on Israel on Saturday is over 1,600 people, 900 of them in Israel, over 700 in Gaza. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency says more than 137,000 Gazans are taking shelter at UN-run schools. The US says it's begun delivering military equipment and munitions to Israel. And the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza has called for the opening of a safe corridor for medical aid, saying hospitals are running low of supplies. Well, Shani Rosanas is Israeli. She's also one of our Middle East analysts and joins us now. Let's start with the figures there from Saturday's attack, because this is a lot bigger than was being reported and what we thought.
Indeed, it just shows you the magnitude of the deceit, the ability of Hamas. For over a year, we know that this has been in the making for over a year. We have a lot of reports on that, also from captured militants that are being interrogated by Israeli forces. So to know that they have managed to coordinate this, to mobilize such a great amount of soldiers, their soldiers, the militants, the terrorists, we're talking anything between 1,500 to 2,000, into Israel territory. That's unbelievable. That's nothing that Israel could ever imagine.
And how? The question is how, because right under the nose of Israel.
How do they manage to smart? I mean, Israel's technology, the intelligence, it's unbelievable. This is the question echoing in everybody's minds today in Israel for a couple of days already. This is part of the shock, part of the trauma. It also had operative meeting on the ground. The assumption for the Israeli security apparatus was always that there will be a head notice and there will be intelligence. And this is partially why everything collapsed. And it's still yet to be seen. There's going to be a lot of hard questions to be asked once, as we hear, it's still dynamic. But in the next days, we will see more and more of these questions coming up.
But what are going to be the next steps? Because we see this ground offensive being prepared, apparently, military hardware building up in southern Israel, close to the border with the Gaza Strip. But there is also a political situation here that has to be clarified.
Exactly. So there are reserve units. There are many reserve soldiers who have already showed up. We're talking about over 300,000 Israeli soldiers who are preparing for the counterattack.
Biggest in history.
Indeed. However, we were just talking about the intelligence, the failure of intelligence, the lost trust in Israel's intelligence apparatus. Now, a Gaza operation is always hard, but under these conditions, it's extremely hard. And Israel is also very much aware, first of all, of the captives left in Gaza and what that might mean. But officially, they're saying it shouldn't be shouldn't have any effect. But of course, in the back of their minds, it's there. And we also need to keep in mind that it might also be a trap.
Okay, we are going to have to.
Gaza has planned for Israel.
Leave it there, unfortunately, because the press conference is now beginning between the French and German leaders. Let's listen in.
Dear Emmanuel,
ladies and gentlemen, 2 intensive days full of work are behind us. For a long term, we have planned this meeting in a new format in order to underline the special quality and the close ties of our relationship between France and Germany. But at short notice, it's turned out to be a very important forum to discuss topical issues of global importance. The situation in Israel obviously kept us very busy. Manuel and myself last night had a discussion with the Italian Prime Minister, Ms. Meloni, with US President Joe Biden and the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. We all agreed that the barbaric attacks of the terrorists against Israeli civilians are to be condemned in the strongest terms. We jointly stand by Israel. We all agree as well that it is Israel's right to defend itself against these despicable attacks. And at the same time, it is important to avoid a further regional escalation. To that end, we are in close contact with many countries of this region. Ladies and gentlemen, Hamburg is, of course, a very special place, not just for myself, as you well know. This city also proudly calls itself the gate to the world. And as a city, state and republic for many hundreds of years, throughout history, the city has looked beyond its confines, looked towards the world, looked into the future. So Hamburg was a good venue for this first Franco-German intergovernmental consultations in the new format. And I think Emmanuel and I agree this format is working. We will and should continue it. Last night we debated with each other how social cohesion can be organised at a time of change. In many Western democracies, we are currently observing how cohesion is vanishing. Right-wing populism is becoming more popular. They emphasize matters that are divisive. They wish to drive society apart. As people who represent a liberal democracy, this cannot leave us cold. The discussion among the members of the cabinets was exciting, full of trust and very open. It was a good thing. And it showed that our countries, our societies, are facing very similar challenges, and we can cope with them because we are strong, vivid democracies, we have national economies and can adapt. All this should give us optimism and self-confidence. A strong and sovereign Europe is one important prerequisite which will allow us to ensure our place in the world despite all the global challenges. This morning we discussed how the technological sovereignty of Europe can be further promoted, can be driven further, in particular but not exclusively pertaining to artificial intelligence. In my opinion, the discussion between the French and the German ministers showed that we all agree we want to use the opportunities of technical progress and shape the future together. When it comes to AI, we have seen that there are huge opportunities in that. And we've discussed at great length which skills and competencies do exist in France and Europe, Germany, how much science we have, how many companies are already working in this area. But more is possible. We want to enable that, and we will work together when it comes to European regulation on this issue. And our idea is to want to make sure that in concrete terms certain applications comply with our regulations, but the development of AI models should not be hampered, because we want the development and use of those to be here in Europe on the basis of the skills we have. Let me also mention three other aspects from our bilateral consultations. First of all, the Ukraine for Ukraine. Our support for Ukraine will remain an important matter, and the consequences of the Russian bombing, terror for the civilian population is to be kept as small as possible. So it is important to protect infrastructure. The Patriot air defense system was announced yesterday to be delivered to Ukraine, and we will do this. Germany and France will continue to support Ukraine in the future as well, and we are currently negotiating bilateral security guarantees with Ukraine. And the second matter, Europe needs to speed up, and we are going to make sure we make this possible along the lines of what we know in the German national debates. In order to make the necessary change possible, to increase our competitiveness also in the economy, we need to cut down on red tape. And in Germany, I've asked everybody to work together for a so-called Germany Pact, an alliance where we will combine all forces to strengthen processes and reduce bureaucracy. But we also will need to have an ambitious agenda to reduce bureaucracy at the European level. And I'm very happy that we have agreed on a joint effort to be made by our two countries. The two ministers of economic affairs, Limet and Habeck, are going to work on that and present some initial results. The third point which concerns us is migration, another field in which we are cooperating closely. We need a joint European system so that clear rules, effective procedures and an orderly setup can be introduced to irregular migration. Emmanuel Macron and I agree on that. So the reform of the European asylum system is going to be driven forward by us with vigour, because that's what we need. We need to provide protection, but also make sure that irregular migration is curtailed, because it does actually prevent some protection. We must make sure we can work on that in the Parliament in Europe, now that the ministers of European countries have come to an agreement, and that alone constitutes great progress. I would like to add one other important issue. We dealt with many of the questions which are important for the future, very intensively too. We are looking at how to make progress in aerospace. We want to make sure that Europe can maintain its sovereignty in this field too. We also looked into matters such as the energy systems in Europe. How can we bring them together in such a way that more growth at lower prices is possible? So this is another area where we work together in a constructive and intensive way to find joint solutions. I mentioned already we had some quite busy 2.5 days. Emmanuel, you and your ministers, I can only say thank you. Thank you. And we're very glad to have you with us. We're very glad that yesterday and today we've been able to discuss matters, always with a view to the grand project that we also have between our two countries, namely Airbus. That's very important. France and Germany are important for Europe as a pair. But of course, as is always the case, there may be different views on individual questions, and yet it is possible to come to joint positions and also to have this all carried by mutual respect and liking. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chancellor. Thank you very much, Olaf, Chancellor, ministers, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you, Chancellor, for organising this Franco-German meeting, for the way you received us here in Hamburg, as it were in your home. And we're also very pleased about this new format of working together, which has now been initiated. It helps us having an informative exchange about issues of development of and in society, artificial intelligence, social cohesion. These were but a few of the issues on our joint agenda. I think I also like the spirit which was very evident here, the ability we have to discuss matters with each other, to find a common position with so many issues, all in the interest of a joint future for the two countries we represent and for Europe. The Franco-German motor of Europe is often discussed, but it is a motor that makes things move forward. It helps us structure matters. It is also a responsibility we have and which we are aware of, and that guided us in these 2 days, we and our teams. And as the Chancellor already said, I would like once again to express also our solidarity for Israel, the way we emphatically condemn the terrorist attacks which the country has been suffering for days now. Last night, the Chancellor and I, together with President Biden and Prime Minister Sunak and Prime Minister Meloni, discussed possible solutions for a permanent peace in the Middle East. And our Franco-German meeting here has made it possible once more to assure Ukraine we will support the country, as well as making clear that we are always committed to a Europe which will protect itself more, which will also protect its borders and its neighboring countries. We do this jointly to protect the Ukrainian people against the Russian invasion. We also have a lot of programs now aimed at strengthening our defence policy in Europe. And as the Chancellor also said, we discussed matters pertaining to integration. The ministers of the Interiors have achieved a very important agreement when it came to migration, which is one of the big issues we discussed. And I think we now must make sure we are more efficient in what we're doing, that we have clear regulations, how to deal with migration, which will help us protect our common borders. That will also give us a starting point which will help to more efficiently combat the people smuggling and to also protect our freedom by protecting our borders. As you already said, Chancellor, it also is important to simplify structures, so a faster, a more efficient Europe is needed, and our ministers will look into that. And I think that is also one of the joint tasks we've set ourselves. Apart from this, it is also very important to make progress in some really technical issues. But that's what is our everyday job. There were many of these specific technical issues we looked into. And I think if we have Franco-German convergence, we can help build a Europe which is stronger, which is more sovereign, and which will be able to react in a very difficult world when there are worrying developments happening which are of concern to our people, whether we're talking about economic or other concerns. It's important for Europe to move forward quickly, to make good investments, to keep our competitiveness, and to have true sovereignty, be autonomous with raw materials, defense, technology, competitive in all these areas as well, because this is very important, because it helps us to finance the social models we have. And I'm very pleased to see that there is a common will among the ministers here. Also, with the Capital Market Union and the Banking Union, we want to give all of that an impulse, because these are all institutions that help push forward private initiatives. And another issue concerns energy. There is a short-term objective we have, which is very much energy policy competitiveness for Europe. But we also want to build up a model which would enable us to be carbon-free. Obviously, we have rather different approaches in some areas, but we went really in depth in our open and frank discussion, and we found that we do want to work together in the next few weeks with our team so that by the end of the month, we can hopefully achieve an agreement. And the same thing is true for questions of aerospace. Here again, competitiveness is very important, decisively so. Europe can contribute a great deal historically alone, and we want to continue strengthening this sector and continue the discussion on that, because agreements in that sector are an absolute must. Otherwise, our European autonomy in access to space cannot be guaranteed. We want to talk to other partners, that goes without saying, but also here it is our strategic autonomy which we will need to ensure in and with the European Union. Regarding artificial intelligence, we've had some very interesting discussions and talks on this issue. Joint funding programs or projects have been discussed. Joint initiatives should be taken so that market access for European research initiatives is enabled. And we have to come to an agreement also among the governments and come to some sort of European regulatory frame that is commensurate with our values. But we equally agree that we don't want the sort of regulation that would sort of suffocate the innovation we need before it really can flourish. So we're working together in order to make sure we don't have excessive regulation. And as far as innovation and competitiveness is concerned, we want to make progress here. There are some examples in startups, and that would make it possible to have more intelligent regulation for particular renewable AI. That's one of the joint approaches we have. We want to work together to push forward joint projects that will also help us to have more capacities, Franco-German European capacities. All that will help reduce our dependence on others. And obviously, to make sure we can join our data as much as possible, at least at the Franco-German, maybe the pan-European level. That's an area we have to work on. Projects aimed at creating a structure where a common framework can be achieved should be started. But with all these innovative models, it's extremely important to have a joint approach to all of that. And our discussions have shown there is a will to bring this forward, also and particularly in the field of cybersecurity. We don't want to be too vulnerable there anymore. This is something dear to both our hearts. Now, ultimately, regarding questions of culture and education, the Franco-German convergence is supposed to grow. We have a lot of joint programs already, but we do intend to go even further. It is something which we have already been experiencing this morning when we had a demonstration. We also saw the cultural pass, as it is called, for the younger generation. That's very important. We're doing a lot for the younger people. But these were the main points I wanted to add to what you, dear Olaf, have already said. But let me just say, it was the spirit of Hamburg which you felt, a very friendly atmosphere. There is a willing to understand better, to have a more informal exchange and to work on achieving solutions in that way. And I think the fruits of Hamburg, however bad or not the weather may be, these fruits of Hamburg will definitely come about, and we will hear more about these discussions we've had today and yesterday, and that will help us on the road to progress. Thank you. Thank you very much. We've agreed on 4 questions. The first question here in the front, please. Hello, Chancellor President. In agreement with my colleagues, there are 3 issues I would like to raise. First is Israel, which both of you already mentioned. The question of the hostages. How many French and German hostages are currently being held in the Gaza Strip? And what do you intend to do in order to free them? How far are the 2 countries, your 2 countries, willing to go, given that Hamas has threatened to execute the hostages? Now a question to Israeli defense. We are seeing that Israeli counterattack is being built up. There is also a blockade which has been instituted now, which also means that the civilian population in the Gaza Strip have no access to food or water or electricity anymore. Are you in favour of that blockade? Yes or no? And one final question regarding Iran. The shadow of Iran seems to be looming behind the Hamas attacks. At least that is what some people say. What do you think is the Iranian role in this crisis? And why aren't you mentioning this in your joint communique? Regarding the first question, I will not mention exact figures or names. We're working together with our embassies, with our partners on the ground, the Israeli authorities and the crisis centers. And I would like to express my thanks to all the diplomats, their staffers, and all the people working with us and with the Israeli authorities on that. As you all know, unfortunately, there are French citizens who have died or are missing. We need to clarify the situation. We do this on a case-by-case basis. And, of course, the first to be informed are the families. The Foreign Minister and the Foreign Ministry, once we have reliable figures, will make a statement on that. The way Hamas is blackmailing us about this is obviously entirely unacceptable. We can only condemn that in the strongest terms. And as far as our potential hostages or missing persons are concerned, I'm very careful how I phrase this. We are in very close agreement with the Israeli authorities. We are working closely with them and with all the other countries who face a similar situation so that we can agree on a joint approach. However, we are relying on our good cooperation with Israel and information from Israel. This blackmail, which has been put forward by Hamas after these attacks, is unacceptable. Israel is now focusing on its defense. Israel is still being attacked, as we've said, and also, as we've said already, we support the defensive measures taken, and we strongly condemn all the still ongoing terrorist attacks. In the next few days, hopefully, it will be possible to stop all attacks against Israel and free the hostages and sort the situation. It is not up to me to look into the future here and now and to describe a science fiction scenario. Our wish is that all of us can work on a lasting peace for this region. This will require political answers, and all of that is going to become clear in the course of time. Regarding Iran, it goes without saying that we condemn all and any countries who have congratulated themselves on these attacks mounted by Hamas, and we are currently agreeing information with our partners. I will not comment on any direct involvement of Iran or not. There have been public statements which are unacceptable, which do not agree with our values. It is possible, if not likely, that there was support for Hamas, but I have to be very cautious here. And I do not wish to say anything before we have reliable and consolidated information. There is not much I could add to that. Let me simply tell you that we also work very closely with Israel so that the missing people or the hostages, and we're still trying to work out just how many people are concerned, can hopefully be freed if they have been taken. This is a matter of the gravest importance, and it is quite helpful that we are very closely in alignment with each other and that we are also in close touch with other countries and on a similar basis. So we're trying to do as much as we possibly can to make sure that the life and safety of these people can be guaranteed. That Israel had to defend itself is clear, and they have our support, but I don't have much to add other than that. The next question, Daniel Brösser, please. Daniel Brösser, Süddeutsche Zeitung. Mr. Chancellor, after the regional elections in Bavaria and Hesse, do you see that Germany is moving to the right? And do you also explain that on the basis of the migration policy? And would that be why you might plan a change in the migration policy beyond the reform of the European asylum system? And President Macron, when you're looking at Germany, are you afraid of Germany, Europe and your own country all moving to the far right? And if so, do you see this as a problem resulting from migration policy? And do you expect Europe to do more in order to combat migration? Thank you. Thank you for this question. There are many votes to a right-wing extremist party in Germany. That does give us cause for concern. It has to do with defending our democracy. It can be no doubt that this party holds political positions which do not gel with our ideas of freedom, democracy, welfare state, the market economy, education, and in particular, it is not commensurate with what we consider to be a European perspective on this. It should be very clear that a large part of our prosperity and our security rests on cooperation within the European Union, particularly our two countries. So it is important we solve the problems, but that's always important and always right. Problems which are there need to be tackled, irrespective of election dates or elections that happen in between. Problems need to be solved because they are there to be solved. That's why some time ago we started with a very consistent policy on migration. We are developing this policy, which on the one hand concerns accepting the related challenges, because Germany, like many other European countries, needs labour immigration, so our economy doesn't shrink, allowing economic growth, allowing our factories to have workers, hospitals to have nurses, hotel.
And let's cut into the joint press conference being held there by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron. A busy 2 days, as they said, of talks at a time of strained ties between Europe's two biggest economies. They had a huge raft of different topics that they've been talking about, but one important one really concerns us here at the moment, and that is the situation in the Gaza Strip. There wasn't that much said. Hans Brandt is our political correspondent, of course. Do tell us what they did have to say, though.
Well, in their initial statements, both of them simply repeated, in fact, what they said yesterday, both personally and in a statement, a joint statement with the Italian, the British and the US heads of government, namely that they would be unwaveringly supporting Israel in its defense against these attacks, and that they condemn the kinds of attacks, the brutality of the attacks by Hamas, and that Israel has a right to defend itself. There was a question then coming from a French journalist about the situation of hostages, and there are French as well as German citizens amongst these hostages, and on that both the leaders were fairly cagey. They were not prepared to divulge much information that they might have, but said that they are cooperating, especially with Israel, but potentially also with other countries in the region to try and ensure the safety and the release of those hostages. But in fact, both of them made it clear that the situation there is still unclear for everyone concerned. I think for many people that are reported missing, it's not clear yet whether they may be they may be dead, whether they count amongst the casualties or possibly amongst those people that have been taken hostage.
So what kind of support are Germany, France, the EU pledging Israel?
At the moment, it's moral support, I think one has to say, simply political support, very forceful and immediate and comprehensive statements that they stand behind Israel, that Israel's right to defend itself is not being questioned, and that includes the blockade of the Gaza Strip, which is taking place at the moment, and whatever other measures Israel decides to take. I think both leaders said there that this is for Israel to decide how to defend itself, and that it would be supported. Whether there are other concrete forms of support, possibly in terms of one could speculate about manpower, or possibly about intelligence, or about some kind of military assistance, all of that is left open completely.
What about assistance and aid to the Palestinians?
Well, that is a question on which the European Union has been a little bit undecided in the last, let's say, 48 hours. Germany has said that it is going to review any humanitarian and other aid that is going to Palestinian areas and Palestinian organizations, and that will be suspended for the time being. The European Union initially announced a similar decision yesterday and then took that back, saying that this is something that's going to be discussed by the foreign ministers who are meeting in Brussels today in an emergency meeting on that situation. So the humanitarian situation, certainly within Gaza especially, is something that European countries and both Germany and France are watching and are concerned about, but how exactly they're going to react to that and what exactly they're going to do remains open.
And Hans, how united would you say EU countries are when it comes to Israeli and Palestinian policy?
I think there are differences here. I think one has to say that support for Israel, I think, is clear. The brutality of these attacks has shocked everyone, and so the clarity with which Israel is supported in its defense against these attacks, I think there's no doubt about that. But when it goes a step further to the question of how peace can be found in the region, this is something both of them said, that they would try to redouble efforts to find a regional solution, a regional peace in the Middle East. When it comes to these kinds of questions, there are big differences in nuances, but also in substance, in how the European countries would like to see that. I think basically one should say that a two-state solution, in other words, a state of independence for Palestine and an independent Israel, are something that most European countries would support without a question. Yeah.
Let's bring in Michaela Kufner, our chief political editor. She joins us from Hamburg, where the talks have been going on. Michaela, could you give us your impressions of those talks there in Hamburg? We were just talking about how little the two leaders really talked about the situation, the conflict at the moment in the Gaza Strip. It was also something that a journalist there at the press conference brought up.
Yeah, and that certainly was looming large in what, after all, were supposed to be consultations, both cabinets basically locking themselves in some meeting at the bar to improve relations and to have a much faster exchange on many issues. I guess you can see it as some measure of success that was seen as such by French President Emmanuel Macron, who stressed that now there was more of a base to talk on many other issues. There were concrete questions. I think it's notable that both France and Germany recognize that their own citizens are among the dead, also among those taken hostage by Hamas. And on the question of Iran, we saw the French president be decidedly, careful, but also the most frank we've heard him so far in saying that he felt it was not safe to say that there was an Iranian involvement, but that essentially he wouldn't be surprised, and he really wanted to only speak once he had concrete intelligence.
He also said, quite frankly, that blackmail is unacceptable. He was referring there, I guess, to the Hamas militants and these hostages that have been taken by Hamas. However, they couldn't give us any more details on that. It sounds like Germany and France are both quite helpless when it comes to the situation there.
Well, I mean, at this very moment in time, it's really down to the Israelis how they will respond. And I think we have seen once again both leaders stress that they see Israel in the right to defend itself. With everybody knowing that one must brace themselves for terrible scenes potentially coming out of a ground offensive going into the Gaza Strip. At the same time, in a statement that was published together with US President Joe Biden, also the Italian and the British Prime Minister, there was also a sentence stressing that the Palestinian people themselves also have a right to their own freedom and have their own rights. So we are seeing the Europeans pretty much stretched in terms of diplomacy here, clearly backing Israel. And we saw the German Chancellor stressing that there are a lot of talks going on in the background, and these will be particularly going on throughout the Arab world.
Our chief political editor, Michael Küffner, in Hamburg for those joint talks between the German and French leaders, and Hans Brandt, our political correspondent. Thank you very much for coming in today. And let's get you back to the topic that matters. The Israeli military says it has more or less restored control over its border with Gaza, but it says infiltrations by Hamas militants could still be possible. It says the bodies of 1,500 Hamas militants have been found in Israeli territory since they staged their unprecedented attack on Saturday. Israel stepped up its retaliatory airstrikes on Gaza overnight. A spokesman for the Israeli military advised any Gazan who could to flee. Hamas said if Israel hit any residential building without warning, then it would start executing Israeli hostages and broadcast it live on TV. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first, a roundup of events so far.
Israeli tanks gather in fields outside Gaza. 2 days after the violent incursion and terrorist attacks by militant group Hamas, hundreds of thousands of Israeli army reservists have reported for duty.
We are imposing a complete siege on Gaza. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything will be closed. We are fighting against human animals, and we are acting accordingly.
Hospitals in Gaza are already feeling the effects of the blockade and are running out of critical supplies to treat the many injured by the ongoing strikes.
Unfortunately, the amount of medical supplies we need to deal with these injuries is insufficient. There just isn't enough, and some of the medicines are not available in the stores of the Ministry of Health. There's also the threat of running out of fuel and a power outage. Medical operations cannot be performed in emergency departments without fuel or electricity.
Israel says it is targeting facilities and headquarters of the Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorist groups, but hundreds of civilians are being hit by the missile offensive across Gaza. Israel says the borders with Gaza will stay tightly closed, reinforced by tanks, while soldiers scour southern Israel for Hamas fighters. But the rocket fire continues into Israel. and so does the aerial bombardment of the Gaza Strip. Israel's prime minister says that this is just the beginning.
I
know that we all want immediate results. It will take time, but I promise you, dear Israeli citizens, at the end of this campaign, all of our enemies will know that it was a grave mistake to attack Israel. What we will do to our enemies in the coming days will reverberate with them for generations.
Fearing further infiltration by militants, Israel is also deploying troops and tanks along its northern border with Lebanon, shelling the area as they try to push back the threat, with Hezbollah responding in kind. Israel now faces the very real prospect of a multi-front war.
And let's go over to our correspondent, Rebecca Ritters, who's in southern Israel, close to the border with the Gaza Strip. Rebecca, bring us up to speed on what's happening.
Well, where I'm standing is about 8 kilometres from Gaza. You can see it over there behind me, or perhaps you can't make it out, but that is the Gaza skyline. You can see it at night often when the rockets are coming from that area, or the missiles, the Iron Dome missiles intercepting. At the moment, this morning, it's been a lot quieter here in this area. We've been seeing less rocket fire, although we have had a couple of instances where they've shot rockets this way. That doesn't mean that there aren't rockets being fired, just I'm talking about specifically where I'm standing. We have been hearing for most of the morning pounding going from the airstrikes into Gaza in the northern part of Gaza, an area known as Beit Hanun. That has also become further apart, but once again, that doesn't mean that they are not still striking Gaza from the air. We've been getting reports from the IDF that they are continuing wide-scale strikes on the Strip, and that goes on. Now, we know that for the civilians inside Gaza, the situation is becoming incredibly dire. The UN is saying that nearly 200,000 people have moved away out of their homes, but we have to remember that the people of Gaza don't really have anywhere to go. They can leave their homes, but they don't know exactly where is safe to run to. There aren't any shelters for them to go to, and there are no ways for them to get out. So for the civilians who are now also living under siege with no water, no electricity, no food or medical supplies being able to get inside, the situation is getting a lot more dire.
And what about people on
we can hear F-16s flying above us as well, Ben, so the airstrikes definitely continuing.
What about people on your side of the border? What's it like for them? I believe there have been warnings today in certain parts that have then been called off. I guess it's a huge psychological game that's going on in people's heads.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a really volatile situation. It's a fast-moving situation. People don't really know what to expect. I was reporting a little bit earlier from an area just over the way from where we're standing now. We had to move. We were asked to move by the military. But from there, you can see the massive military build-up that is starting to amass around the Gaza border. We don't exactly know what the plans are. So the situation's volatile. Residents here on this side also very concerned about what's going to happen. Now, you know, I preface that by saying this is an area that is used to seeing rocket fire. It's used to seeing flare-ups between Israel and Gaza. The people here are normally, I hesitate to say relaxed about these flare-ups. They see it as a daily reality or a part of their normal lives, but the situation now is incredibly different to that. When you talk to people, they are worried. The streets are all but deserted. Shops are open. It's very hard to find food, even for us reporting out here, but also for, of course, all the citizens here. You know, the supermarket shelves are becoming empty, I've been hearing, because people are rushing to try and stock up supplies, preparing for what could be a bigger conflict.
Also, Hamas says they'll execute hostages if Israel does not warn inhabitants before bombing buildings. It's something that was touched on at a joint press conference between the French and German leaders. French and German hostages could also be among those hostages taken by Hamas at the weekend. What is your assessment of the situation there?
Well, we did hear that from Hamas. They have said that they will start executing some of the prisoners that we have. We're not exactly certain of precisely how many there are in Gaza. The military, we're just hearing artillery fire as well here. We do know that the military are aware. They do know now how many hostages there are, but they're contacting all the families before they are able to give us any more concrete information on that. The number that they keep telling us, or the words they keep using, is in the dozens. But we've heard from the Israeli UN ambassador, and he's saying between 100 and 150. So we will have more news on that today. Hamas yesterday coming out to say that they will start executing the prisoners if the attacks from the Israeli military into Gaza fall in, that they attack civilian areas or civilian targets without notifying the civilians inside the buildings. Now the Israeli military say that they have been notifying, that they do notify civilians, but normally in these flare-ups, oftentimes they do what is called a knock on the roof effect, whereas they fire a very small ammunition to warn civilians to leave the building, warn civilians of something bigger to come. But they've told us this morning that they're in this. With the scale of this attack, that they are not able to do that. So we still don't know whether Hamas will follow through on their words, but it's hard to see that they are not going to follow through with what they say when it comes to that.
And we're talking about such a densely populated part of the planet there in the Gaza Strip. Rebecca Ritter's reporting from just nearby, close to the Israeli border there to Gaza. Thank you. Well, since Saturday's attack, Israel has declared war on Hamas and vowed to destroy its ability to govern Gaza. The militant Palestinian Islamist group is considered a terrorist organisation by the EU and US. Here's more on what Hamas represents.
The Gaza Strip, where the Israeli Defense Forces have been striking targets belonging to the militant Islamist Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad groups. It's from this densely populated enclave lying between Israel, Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea that Hamas has for years launched rockets into Israel. The group has governed the over 2 million residents in Gaza since 2007. Since then, Gaza has been seen as enemy territory by Israel and has remained largely sealed off. Israel controls access by land, sea and air. The militant Islamist group rejects any peace process with Israel and calls for its destruction. Hamas is designated a terrorist group by Israel, the United States, the EU and the United Kingdom, among other countries. Hamas is part of a regional alliance that includes Iran, Syria and the Islamist organisation Hezbollah in Lebanon, which opposes US policies towards the Middle East and Israel. The EU and other countries have deemed Hezbollah a terrorist organisation. Hamas has carried out attacks on Israel, which have led to 4 major military conflicts with the Israeli army in 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014 and 2021. Hamas has warned that this latest wave of attacks are just the beginning and called on other groups to join the fight.
Well, many were killed in an Israeli farming community near the Gazan border. Over 100 bodies were found at the Beeri kibbutz after a standoff between Hamas militants and the Israeli military. Survivors have been talking about what happened when the militants infiltrated their community.
They faced death and escaped it. 400 people who witnessed the massacre at Beeri kibbutz near Gaza, in bunkers under constant fire. Is there anything you need, or can I help you with anything? This volunteer asks. Yes, give me back my kibbutz, the woman says. Give me back my murdered friends. The army let them die. In the middle of Israel. The killers struck on Saturday morning. They captured the moments when they looted, kidnapped and randomly killed people. Anyone who went outside was killed immediately. Those who stayed inside heard gunshots, screams, bangs.
They slaughtered us, executed us. There were so many of them with such heavy weapons. We were trapped in the bunker. We didn't know what was going on outside. We only had WhatsApp.
The David Hotel in Ein Bokek by the Dead Sea, far from the place they once called home. Psychologists and emergency teams try to distract these people from the atrocities they've experienced, at least for a few moments.
At some point we were rescued, still under fire. My kids were so brave. We had to cover their eyes because we stepped over bodies on our way out. Now we're thinking about how to bury the dead. Whole families have been wiped out. There are kids who have lost their parents and parents who have lost their children. Something in us has been broken, and I don't know how we can ever recover from this.
Volunteers brought these donations, but no one saw any officials or government representatives. They feel neglected. First by the army, now by the state, left alone in fear.
When you sit in a bunker for 6-8 hours and block the door with just your hand until it turns blue, you change your hand. You just have a baseball bat. Your son tells you, if they breach, hit them. That's not the life I want to live.
But they're alive, luckily, and they must be strong now, for each other.
Another site attacked by Hamas was an outdoor music festival in the desert close to the border with Gaza. The militants launched rockets and sprayed people there with gunfire. At least 260 died and dozens others were taken hostage.
Scenes of terror at a rave in the desert. Hamas terrorists opened fire on the crowds and chased people down, taking hostages. One woman said she hid in a citrus grove to stay alive.
And they were just all around me, and they were going tree by tree and shooting everywhere from two sides. And I saw many people, people were dying, all around.
This video shows a terrified young woman driven away on a motorbike by fighters, while her partner is marched away, his hands tied behind his back. The aftermath, hundreds of dead bodies, charred vehicles along the road. A few were lucky. This footage purportedly shows a hostage rescue. Israeli forces freeing people after a fierce gun battle with Hamas. Foreign nationals were also taken. One hostage's mother made an appeal from Germany.
We were sent a video in which I clearly recognized my daughter, she said, unconscious in a car with the Palestinians who drove along the Gaza Strip. I am asking for any news or help to please be sent to us.
Diplomatic efforts are underway to arrange a humanitarian corridor to evacuate women, children, and elderly hostages. But for now, relatives can only watch and wait.
Well, earlier I spoke to Ras Gasta, the manager of several acts at the festival, who witnessed the events as they unfolded.
Hello, good morning. The attack started in just hundreds of missiles flying everywhere. This is how it started for us, 6:30 in the morning, a bombardment of hundreds of missiles and mortars flying from everywhere. This is how it all started for us.
It was a huge attack and so many lives lost. How did you manage to get away?
I managed to get away as when started the bombardment, of course, we dropped to the floor and we covered our heads, trying to find shelter, and there was no shelter where we were. So inside of 5 minutes, we were in the car, driving as fast as we can outside of the venue, outside of the festival venue, to safety, as fast as we can. Luckily, we managed to go out 1 or 2 minutes before other people started to get shot at.
And what happened once you got out?
Once we go out, luckily, I drove west and not towards Tel Aviv, where there was ambushes by the terrorists. And we drove west, and that's what saved us. We drove, me and another Brazilian artist. We drove as fast as we can to another shelter where we had another artist from France and Mexico. We were worried about them. We didn't realize that that's what saved us, but we were hurrying to get to them as they were there alone in the house.
And after escaping, you still managed to help. How?
After I managed to escape, as always, we need to be the ones that, taking care. There is the army that, of course, and the government that do all the work, but we need to support as well. And we were the ones that starting to get all the messages from the people on site, calling us for help. They don't have a line of communication directly to the army that was busy fighting the terrorists like they should. So they were calling us, the people that they know, and other people were calling us, bringing us messages from other people, their locations. And that is what we are doing since that moment that it all happened.
And
we opened many people, many volunteers. We opened just groups, and we are sending help and trying to find each and every person.
Are you still looking for people? Do you still have friends who are missing?
Yeah, we still have friends that they are missing. We don't know what happened with them. And for this, we already not sleeping for 3 nights and 3 days. And we are just looking for any information for our friends, for us. This is the importance of the community, that all the community came together, volunteers, many people came together. And every day they are sitting 24/7 around the clock and just looking for more and more information and to get any info on each and every one of our friends they are still missing. This is the important mission at the moment, to try to save as much life as we can.
Can you tell me more about security at the festival?
It's not something that I can tell you. I'm not part of the production. Of course, it was a full license event with police on site, with full security detail. But it was full licensed and confirmed by the government and by all the police and fire department. It had a full legal license.
What's also interesting is that they changed the location of the festival at the last minute.
This is also not something that I can talk about. Again, I'm not part of the production. I'm an artist manager. So this is not something that I can talk about or refer to. I bring my artists to the production. Luckily, we managed to save and get out each and every international artist, including German artists. We managed to get all of them, me and other bookers and artist agents. We managed to get fast all of them out, and now all of them are already out of the country without any harm. And that's also important.
How many people would you say you managed to save, or help save on that day?
We managed to save a lot because our friends on field were there and the forces on the field were there, and they were listening to the locations that we send, and we managed to save like this many people, sending their location that they send us, hiding from terrorists. They sent it to us in every way possible, and we were sending our people and our forces one by one by GPS locations to rescue people and recover them.
And how are you doing? How are you coping after what you saw unfold, what you experienced, and your escape?
Actually, there was no time to really sit down and, take in everything that happened, because at the moment we are still in this bad situation. We are still in a war situation. And at the moment, as I mentioned before, for us, as people that know the people that are missing and part of the community, for us the importance now is to keep working and keep trying to find each and every person that we can. We know about people that can survive 2-3 days without food on site. So we still have the full hope that we can find still our friends, at least any of them, or bring any info back to the family. This is our mission, and we have so many people around us now working, volunteering only for this.
Okay, well, my thoughts are with you and your friends. It's been great talking to you, Raz Guster, artist manager and witness to that festival attack we have been bringing to you here on DW News. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Well, the attack by Hamas and Israel's response have inflamed emotions around the world. Here's a look at some of the places where the conflict has brought people onto the streets.
Passionate pleas on both sides. In New York City, supporters of Israel and the Palestinians just meters apart. Police lined up trying to keep the opposing sides separated.
I'm a Syrian refugee. I came to this country in 1994. I came into this country from 1994 because people like him could not tolerate a free Jew. But we are free now. We will remain free. We will no longer be dhimmis, subject to the oppression and the subjugation.
We demand an end to the siege and blockade of Gaza. We demand an end to the occupation. We demand an end to the colonization of Palestine and all Arab lands.
Similar scenes in London at a pro-Palestinian rally. Protesters holding hands to express solidarity for their cause.
That's why I came here. I raised my voice. Stop the war, stop the war. We want peace. We want to live together. We don't want to kill each other. That's enough, enough, enough.
Here too, things got heated.
Stop the murdering of innocent Israelis and Jews! Stop it! Why? Stupid woman!
The Hamas attack on Israel has sent shockwaves across the world. In Chile, Indonesia, Australia, Belgium, emotions are raging.
And finally, just a brief look at some of the other stories from around the world. Mass funerals have been held in northwestern Afghanistan after a series of powerful earthquakes on Saturday that left more than 2,000 people dead. Thousands of others were injured after the tremors flattened whole villages. Residents and rescue workers continue to search through the ruins. 8 groups are appealing for the international community to send urgent assistance. And there have been clashes between riot police and protesters at an indigenous march in the Chilean capital, Santiago. Police used water cannon and tear gas. The demonstrators threw objects at them. The indigenous activists say agriculture and forestry are increasingly threatening their lands and the state is failing to protect their rights. Sarah Kelly will have more news for you next hour.
German Mineral Resource Agency is sounding the alarm. Is the country's supply of key minerals at risk? Geologists are looking for new sources of these raw materials and are offering counsel to industry and government. The biggest concern? Valuable metals are difficult to obtain and are becoming increasingly expensive.
Tomorrow Today. Next on DW.
But I wish I could have done more to save you.
Discover stories that move you. Just a click away. Find our best documentaries on YouTube.
We have some really good news this morning.
See the world as you've never seen it before. Subscribe now to DW Documentary. Learn German with DW. While singing,
ohne Sprache ist man ganz allein.
Cheering, or empathizing. This award-winning offer is available worldwide. And for every language level. Learning German has never been simpler. German to go. Online, on Facebook, the App Store, and YouTube. Energy-saving lights, smartphones, computers, electric cars, wind turbines. We need metals for all of these things. But mining them is not just energy intensive, it harms the environment. Is recycling an alternative? Or could we source raw materials from space? That and more coming up. Hello and welcome to Tomorrow Today, DW Science Programme. Lithium is commonly used in batteries that power electric vehicles. The lightest metal on Earth is abundantly found, but only in small concentrations. And mining lithium is complex, expensive, and harmful to the environment. And even when lithium is contained within the batteries, it's still dangerous.
Explosions and fires caused by lithium-ion batteries after shorting, damage, or overheating. Time and again, we see how dangerous they can be. That's why the world is searching urgently for new battery technology. At the Helmholtz Institute in the German city of Ulm, researchers are trying to find a replacement for lithium as an energy source, and quickly.
Yeah, we don't have much time because it's expected that demand for batteries is going to grow very, very strongly. We're expecting a 4,600% increase by 2030. That means we have to give battery technology a wide material base. We have to bring abundant, cheap, and easily recyclable materials into play.
The rise in demand for battery storage is huge, with wind and solar power expansion one of the main drivers. Then there's the electromobility sector. By 2045, there are expected to be 30 million electric vehicles in Germany alone that will need lithium for their batteries.
Lithium may be abundant, but it can't be mined quickly enough to meet demand completely. That means we have to turn to materials that are widely available, but still do a very good job.
The inner structure of a lithium-ion battery contains three problematic materials: a positive terminal of cobalt, a negative terminal of graphite, and the lithium itself, which moves back and forth between the poles to load and discharge the battery. Cobalt is poisonous and is now often replaced by lithium iron phosphate to create what's known in the industry as an LFP battery. Chinese firm BYD has developed a new battery design because LFP technology still requires a lot of space in the battery cells.
You now have large units in place of these small battery cells, which are a bit bigger than a chocolate bar. And they simply need less packaging on the outside. As a result, you can accommodate much more storage material in the actual overall battery.
Using lithium-ion chemistry in this space-saving battery design gives an amazing 1,000 kilometers of range. The new LFP chemistry offers a much reduced range, but the batteries have other advantages. They don't require cobalt and are also 30% cheaper, as well as being much safer. In the case of lithium-ion batteries, the nail puncture test shows why these batteries are so dangerous. The resulting short circuit causes an explosion and a fire that isn't easily put out. LFP batteries are completely different. Here, the nail test causes only an increase in temperature. Also, LFP batteries will in the future be able to be recharged 3,000 to 5,000 times at charging stations. That's 10 times as much as current rechargeable batteries. But the range with a full battery is only 60% that of a lithium-ion battery. And charging in cold weather also causes problems. But the biggest hopes yet in battery development are for sodium-ion technology. It replaces the battery's lithium ions with sodium ions. This change in battery chemistry also allows cobalt and graphite terminals to be replaced with more sustainable materials. But sodium-ion batteries are quite a bit heavier. Yet not everything needs to be as light as a cell phone battery. For example, in huge wind energy storage facilities, such as these in Australia, weight is not an issue. The sodium is produced from ordinary table salt, which is readily available in large quantities. Sodium-ion batteries have a shorter range on a single charge, but they charge faster and are almost full again after just 15 minutes. Another advantage, unlike almost all other batteries, they still deliver 90% of their power in freezing temperatures. And even in the classic internal combustion engine, the starter batteries can be replaced by sodium batteries, and with it their toxic chemistry. After all, the global market for starter batteries is as large as that for lithium-ion batteries.
Ultimately, the question is, how quickly are all the raw materials on the market? How quickly will they be available, and can they be installed? The production capacities are being prepared at the moment. That's where everyone is actually very well positioned in the next few years.
But whether sodium or lithium, without natural resources, we wouldn't have any new batteries at all.
Heavy industries depend on metals sourced from raw materials. If their supply is cut, production lines everywhere grind to a halt. The availability or scarcity of raw materials determines their market price. Germany imports metals from all over the world. This has geologists on the hunt for new sources.
Headquartered in Berlin, the German Minerals Resource Agency, DERA for short, trades raw materials sourced all over the world to companies on behalf of the German government. This is copper ore that contains cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Copper is used for electricity, from e-mobility to renewable energy technology for power transmission, and cobalt we need for batteries.
in den Batterien brauchen.
Ziamend Al-Barazi is concerned about Germany's raw material supplies.
Wir sind im Moment wirklich mit vielen
We're currently facing a lot of challenges. All over the world, supply chains have been disrupted or even broken. And there's the current Ukraine-Russia situation, of course. DERA develops new concepts to keep politicians and industry leaders up to speed on risks that impact supply and market prices. They focus on so-called megatrends, like the move to electromobility.
Megatrends are first and foremost global phenomena. Among the things we're focusing on are technologies such as the lithium-ion battery for e-mobility and electrolysis for hydrogen production, and raw material demand in the future.
In this time of energy transition, some key raw materials are hard to procure and becoming increasingly expensive. This means that geologists have to act early. To warn others of possible supply bottlenecks or price fluctuations, they prepare dossiers and studies like this one with cobalt. This green line is great for showing us how the cobalt price has more than doubled in the last 2 years on the London Metal Exchange. On one side, this is because of increased demand. On the other, because of the problems to supply chains that we have had to deal with in the past few years. Cobalt is important for lithium-ion batteries. In 2021, 70% of the global market share was mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has been plagued for decades by political and social unrest. Number 2 on the cobalt market is Russia. Market share around 4%, but risky. Prices could skyrocket further and deliveries may not be met. We tell German firms to diversify, to move away from supply from only one country.
If you know that a raw material is critical, you look for potential replacements for it. So you try to replace these materials with others if possible.
But that's not always possible. Special metals like rare earths are needed urgently to build wind turbines. Rare earths are found worldwide, though never in pure form, only in compounds. Their separation and upgrading is done with the aid of acids. A large amount of toxic overburden is produced in the process. China's rare earth demand amounts to 86% of the global supply. If we're travelling through countries, then we try to get as rounded as possible a picture of the whole sector. We publish this information, which we also include in our consultancy service. DERA also shares its information with non-governmental organisations, such as Berlin-based PowerShift, which campaigns against global inequality concerning human rights and environmental issues.
Wir können auch nicht alles erfassen.
We can't cover everything. There are 25 of us in the team. NGOs are very important in bringing to light abuses in certain countries. That helps us recognise developments early. It's also important for our studies and analysis. It's an important collaboration, because the energy revolution can only truly be clean when the raw materials are procured fairly and sustainably.
Rare earths are chemical elements from the lanthanide group. The element yttrium is a rare earth as well. Rare earths is a misleading name as they're neither rare nor are they earth. Their colors range from stone to silver and are quick to tarnish when exposed to oxygen or react quickly when they come into contact with water. One of their many applications is in the production of permanent magnets, which are also used in wind turbines. At the beginning of 2023, a huge deposit of rare earths was discovered in Sweden. An untapped 1 million tons is thought to be in the ground north of the Arctic Circle, but to this day no permission has been granted to mine them. The known methods of their separation and upgrading would harm the environment.
They've been mining iron ore for many years in Kiruna, and the mine is considered one of the world's largest. If the head of the state-owned mining company has his way, a new mine will soon be added. Exploration has detected more than 1 million tons of rare earth oxides.
We have ongoing exploration activities in this deposit, which means that for us it's open, it's not closed. We don't actually know how big it is, but what we know today is by far the largest deposit of REEs in Europe.
That's going to be exciting.
That might help Europe fulfill its goal of becoming climate neutral by 2050. As anyone building wind turbines or e-car batteries needs rare earths. After a press conference in the tunnels of the Kiruna mines, Sweden's Minister of Finance is thinking big. Sweden has a proud history of mining, but also a bright future ahead. Many of these so-called rare earths are critical in going green and meeting our ambitious climate targets. Until now, Europe has relied on imports, and China dominates the industry. According to estimates by U.S. geologists, the deposits in China are 40 times larger than those in Sweden. Environmental groups hope that the deposits in Northern Europe will be mined in a greener way than in Asia.
Transitioning to renewable energy and electromobility has made us too dependent on China and the dirty mining going on there. If we can mine our own rare earths in Europe, implementing better methods and climate protection, then this find is a real game changer.
But it will take perseverance to reach that turning point, and also the goodwill of the Sami people, who have lived up north since time immemorial. The area that they want to develop runs straight through the land of the reindeer herders. And additionally, official approval and construction of a new mine could take 5 to 10 years.
Instead of mining new raw materials, could we recycle those that have already been processed and are in circulation? It's a feasible option, even when it comes to lithium-ion batteries used in electric vehicles. The batteries have to be shredded and the fundamental materials separated. But how does this work in detail?
Let's get out the Lego to understand how lithium-ion batteries get recycled. It often involves smelting, so essentially heating them until they melt. But this uses lots of energy, creates toxic emissions, and you lose some of the materials. That's why companies are coming up with new ways to recycle.
You want to have, as much as we can, high-value materials that have taken a lot of effort to get out of the ground. We want to use those carefully and as many times as we can.
This is Kunal Falfer, Chief Commercial Officer at Li-Cycle, a lithium-ion battery recycling company from Canada.
We've basically come up with a process designed specifically for this, to have high recovery rates of the material. And the first stage, what we call our spoke, is a mechanical process that breaks down the batteries and separates some of the fundamental materials.
Very, very simply speaking, this is what happens. The batteries are shredded while being submerged in a non-toxic solution. This is important because it prevents them from catching fire and, in the worst case, blowing up. Then materials like plastic, copper and aluminium are separated from what the industry calls the black mass. This contains valuable materials like cobalt, nickel and lithium.
The second part of the process is the hub, and this is really a bespoke hydrometallurgy or wet chemistry process to process black mass into battery-grade materials.
What this means is that different chemicals get added to the black mass, which leach out different elements. These chemicals either make their way into the final product or are reused in the process, so this doesn't actually produce any wastewater. You end up with the black mass separated into single components like lithium, cobalt and nickel.
So the end goal is that as we pull them out of the batteries, we're putting them back into new batteries. And that hasn't been achieved yet at a high scale. There's elements of it around the world, but we want to help to continue to drive that forward.
It's hard to keep track of exactly how many lithium-ion batteries already get recycled, mainly because they're often exported. But it's already happening more and more, especially in Asia, where most of them are also produced. And as volumes of spent batteries grow, it will also make even more financial sense to recycle them.
This is the end in the ideal world that we We hope that there's no virgin minerals need to be mined, and all the minerals, materials that they already produce could be reused indefinitely.
If our blood is red, why are our veins red?
Want to find out more about raw materials? Or are you curious about something else from the world of science? Send us a voice message or a video. If we answer your questions on the show, you'll even get a small prize as a thank you. Come on, just ask. This week, our viewer question is from Callisto Saldana in Colombia.
Why are researchers more interested in Mars than in the Moon? Mars is our outer next-door neighbor. Its orbit is further away from the Sun than the Earth's. Mars is the only other planet in our solar system that humans could conceivably live on. That makes it especially interesting. Mars has a comparable day and night rhythm to Earth. A day on Mars is just 37 minutes longer than a day on our planet. It's shaped our biorhythms. Lunar days and nights are both 14 Earth days long, with extreme temperature swings between daytime and nighttime. Because unlike Earth and Mars, the Moon has no atmosphere to regulate the warmth and the coldness. Mars and Earth also have similar light conditions, as these sunsets on both planets show. On top of that, the Earth's axis is inclined almost as strongly as Mars's. All these shared commonalities mean that their atmospheres have similar characteristics. In comparative planet research, that makes Mars's atmosphere a model of the Earth's atmosphere. The Moon would be of no use. The Earth's atmosphere is primarily made of nitrogen and oxygen. It's the only planet in the solar system with liquid water on its surface. There was also water on Mars 3.5 billion years ago, as these river valleys show. Then the red planet's climate was more conducive to life, and its atmosphere denser. But Mars has lost a large part of its atmosphere. A constant flow of particles from the Sun blows parts of Mars's upper atmosphere into space. Earth's atmosphere is largely protected against this by its magnetic field. Today, Mars's atmosphere is only 1/100th the density of Earth's. And the world that was once conducive to life has turned into a dry, icy desert. Water can only exist on the red planet as ice or vapor. There's even ice covering the surface of its poles. And in the ground, there are rich reserves of important resources for manned outposts. In early 2022, Europe's ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter discovered vast reserves of water ice under the Valles Marineris, the so-called Grand Canyon of Mars. Simulations are already in use to calculate whether it would be possible to set up an artificial magnetic field between Mars and the Sun to make the red planet more conducive to life again. Air pressure and temperature would rise until the carbon dioxide ice at the North Pole melts and sparks a greenhouse effect that turns the ground ice into rivers and seas. It would be possible, at least in theory.
Now back to the topic of raw materials. There's yet another potential source for us to explore in space. Sounds far out, but in theory it seems possible. Some celestial bodies that pass by Earth are untapped gold mines, literally.
In 2015, an asteroid that passed close to our planet was estimated to contain more platinum than has ever been mined on Earth. Or take asteroid 16 Psyche, a metal-rich world said to be worth $700 quintillion. Mining asteroids seemed just theoretical for a long time because space travel was just too expensive, but that's changing. A seat on a SpaceX rocket is 3 times cheaper than it was on the space shuttle. This has started a new gold rush. In 2012, Larry Page, the co-founder of Google, put his wealth behind the company Planetary Resources, which joined the race to mine asteroids. In 2017, NASA announced it would pay a visit to Psyche.
We will get there.
This is Lindy Elkins-Tanton, who heads NASA's Psyche mission.
An important thing to note is that the Psyche mission that I'm running is a pure science mission.
But although the program is not about asteroid mining, it could help lay the groundwork for such missions in the future. Crazy as it sounds, mining asteroids might not only be feasible, but also much more sustainable than mining on Earth.
And it actually turns out that the answer seems to be yes.
Andreas Hein is a researcher who has actually crunched the numbers. He estimates that the rocket fuel needed to go and bring back 1 kilogram of platinum from an asteroid would release 150 kilograms of CO2 into the Earth's atmosphere. Terrestrial mining would generate 40,000 kilograms. So asteroid mining could be hundreds of times less polluting.
Essentially, the main reason is there's almost no other substance you can mine which generates that much greenhouse gases.
Outsourcing mining to space would decrease pollution on Earth, but there's an economic problem.
In terms of sustainability, it's a gigantic win. In terms of economics, it's not profitable yet.
The problem, if you mine like 5 times of the platinum you have on Earth right now, it means that the market prices will immediately crash. You can sell it at a much lower price, which means that you're diminishing your profit margin. So you're operating your infrastructure at a loss, and that makes it very unattractive for investors.
Carbon taxes and new technologies could change this equation, but it would still take several years for space mining to become profitable. Investors do not want to wait that long. Levitsky's company failed to raise enough funds, forcing it to abandon its goal of mining asteroids.
Planetary Resources didn't succeed in their ultimate goal to mine asteroids, but I think it succeeded in a lot of ways of the steps to get there.
The business case doesn't quite yet close, but we could make it get there. We can find a way. And I think it is in some ways the inevitable future of humankind because we can't resist. It's been our history, as long as we've been able to track it going backwards, that humans are explorers.
New inventions can make space mining economical. Just a few decades ago, the very technology you're using to watch this video seemed impossible. Today, we can use satellites to beam the internet everywhere on the planet.
10, 15, 20 years, a lot can happen.
One day, mining on Earth may be obsolete, a bit like using candles to light your room.
And that was this week's episode of Tomorrow Today, DW Science Show. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay curious. Bye-bye.